The Epstein Files, the real story told as one continuous narrative. He was not born into power. Jeffrey Edward Epstein entered the world in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York, far from the private islands and Manhattan mansions that would one day define his name. His parents were middle class. There were no political dynasties in his bloodline, no inherited wealth, no royal lineage. And yet, by the early 2000s, Epstein would be dining with presidents, socializing with royalty, funding scientists, and flying on private jets across the globe. How he climbed that far, and what he did with that access, would become one of the most disturbing scandals in modern history. Epstein was intelligent. By most accounts, exceptionally so. After high school, he attended Cooper Union and later New York University, though he never completed a degree. Despite lacking formal credentials, he secured a job teaching mathematics and physics at the Dalton School, one of Manhattan's most elite private institutions. Dalton was not just a school, it was a gateway. Its student body included the children of wealthy executives and influential families. Through those connections, Epstein was introduced to powerful figures in finance. One of those introductions changed everything. Alan Ace Greenberg, the CEO of Bear Stearns, gave Epstein an opportunity on Wall Street in the mid-1970s. Epstein entered the world of high finance without a college degree, yet quickly adapted to its culture of risk and reward. By the early 1980s, he left Bear Stearns and began presenting himself as a financial manager for the ultra-wealthy. He claimed he only handled money for billionaires. Over time, he accumulated extraordinary wealth, though exactly how much he managed and for whom would later become a subject of scrutiny. By the 1990s, Epstein had constructed a life that looked untouchable. A vast townhouse on East 71st Street in Manhattan, one of the largest private homes in the city. A waterfront mansion in Palm Beach, Florida, a sprawling ranch in New Mexico, and a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands called Little St. James. He traveled by private jet. He hosted gatherings filled with academics, politicians, celebrities, and entrepreneurs. He donated to scientific research institutions. He funded university programs. He cultivated an image of a well-connected philanthropist and intellectual patron. From the outside, he looked like a financier who had mastered access. But behind the gates of his Palm Beach mansion, something else was happening. In 2005, the father of a 14-year-old girl walked into the Palm Beach Police Department. His daughter had been paid to give Epstein a massage. What began as a single complaint quickly unfolded into something far larger. Detectives interviewed more girls. The pattern emerged slowly at first. Teenage girls, many from financially vulnerable backgrounds, were allegedly recruited to Epstein's home. They were told they could earn money for giving massages. Payments were typically a few $100s. But according to later court documents and victim testimony, the massages escalated into sexual acts. Some girls were allegedly encouraged to recruit others. Palm Beach police identified dozens of potential victims. By 2006, local law enforcement recommended multiple felony charges. The case was referred to federal prosecutors. And then, instead of escalating into a sweeping federal trial, it quietly narrowed. In 2008, Epstein reached a non-prosecution agreement with federal authorities. The deal was highly unusual. Federal charges were dropped. He pleaded guilty in state court to 2 charges related to prostitution. He was sentenced to 18 months in jail. He served approximately 13. He was granted work release privileges, allowing him to leave jail for up to 12 hours a day. He registered as a sex offender. Most controversially, the agreement granted immunity to unnamed potential co-conspirators. Many of the victims were not informed of the deal before it was finalized, a decision that would later be ruled a violation of federal victims' rights law. For many observing from the outside, it appeared that Epstein, despite serious allegations, had received extraordinary leniency. When he left jail in 2009, he did not disappear. He returned to his Manhattan townhouse. He resumed hosting gatherings. He maintained relationships with powerful individuals. Some distanced themselves, others did not. For years, the case faded from national attention. But the victims did not forget. In 2018, more than a decade after the original plea deal, investigative journalist Julie K. Brown published a series of reports in the Miami Herald. She interviewed numerous victims and exposed details about how the 2008 agreement had been negotiated. The articles reignited public outrage. Suddenly, Epstein's name was everywhere again. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York began building a new case. On July 6, 2019, Epstein's plane landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. Federal agents were waiting. He was arrested and charged with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. The indictment alleged that between 2002 and 2005, Epstein exploited and abused dozens of underage girls in New York and Florida. When federal agents searched his Manhattan townhouse, they reportedly found large amounts of cash, digital storage devices, and photographs, including images of underage girls. Epstein pleaded not guilty. He was denied bail and detained at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. For the first time, it appeared that a full federal trial might finally expose everything: the network, the finances, the relationships, the evidence. Then, on August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his jail cell. He was pronounced dead. The New York City medical examiner ruled the death a suicide by hanging. Subsequent investigations by the Department of Justice Inspector General identified serious failures at the jail. Guards did not conduct required checks, and surveillance cameras malfunctioned. 2 correctional officers were charged with falsifying records, though the charges were later dismissed after a deferred prosecution agreement. Epstein's death ensured that he would never stand trial. For many victims, it meant they would never confront him in court. For the public, it fueled suspicion and speculation that continues to this day. But the story did not end with his death. It was only beginning. Jeffrey Epstein was gone, but the case was not. In the days after his death, attention shifted rapidly to one name that had appeared for years alongside his: Ghislaine Maxwell. If Epstein had been the financier at the center, Maxwell was often described by accusers as the bridge. Born in 1961, Ghislaine Maxwell was the daughter of British media magnate Robert Maxwell. She grew up surrounded by influence and privilege. After her father's death in 1991, a scandal of its own involving financial fraud, she eventually settled in New York. There, she met Jeffrey Epstein. By the 1990s, the two were closely associated. They attended events together, traveled together, moved within the same elite circles. But according to later federal prosecutors and multiple victims, Maxwell's role went far beyond social companionship. In July 2020, nearly a year after Epstein's death, federal agents arrested Maxwell in New Hampshire. The charges were serious. She was accused of recruiting underage girls for Epstein, of grooming them, of normalizing sexual abuse, of participating in trafficking. The indictment alleged that between 1994 and 2004, Maxwell helped identify vulnerable teenage girls, often from unstable backgrounds, and brought them into Epstein's world under the guise of mentorship or opportunity. Prosecutors described a grooming process. Girls were allegedly told they were special, mature, chosen. They were introduced to a lifestyle of wealth and influence. Gradually, boundaries were crossed. Maxwell pleaded not guilty. Her trial began in late 2021 in federal court in Manhattan. Over several weeks, the jury heard testimony from multiple women who described being recruited as teenagers. Some testified that Maxwell had been present during abuse. Others described her as someone who encouraged participation, who reassured them, who framed the environment as normal. The defense argued inconsistencies in memories, pointed to the passage of time, and emphasized that Epstein, the central figure, was no longer alive to testify. In December 2021, the jury returned a verdict. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted on 5 counts, including sex trafficking conspiracy and transporting minors for illegal sexual activity. In 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Her conviction marked the first major criminal accountability connected directly to Epstein's trafficking operation. But it still left larger questions unanswered. Who else knew? Who else participated? Who else may have enabled him? The public's focus then turned toward the civil lawsuits. One of the most high-profile involved Prince Andrew, Duke of York, Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's accusers, filed a civil lawsuit alleging that she had been trafficked to Prince Andrew when she was 17. Prince Andrew denied the allegations. The case did not go to trial. In February 2022, it was settled out of court. The settlement included a financial payment and a statement expressing regret, though it contained no admission of wrongdoing. The controversy significantly affected Prince Andrew's public role within the British royal family. Beyond individual lawsuits, attention expanded to institutions. Major financial institutions had handled Epstein's money for years. In 2023, Lawsuits alleged that certain banks ignored warning signs about Epstein's transactions despite red flags. Some institutions reached settlements totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. These cases shifted the narrative from focusing solely on one man to examining systemic failures, how financial, legal, and social institutions may have enabled his activities to continue for years. Meanwhile, another battle unfolded quietly in courtrooms: the unsealing of documents. For years, thousands of pages related to Epstein's network remained sealed. These included depositions, contact books, emails, and references to hundreds of individuals, some powerful, some obscure. Journalists and advocacy groups pushed for transparency. Gradually, judges ordered portions of the records unsealed. When documents were released, headlines exploded worldwide. But an important clarification emerged quickly. Many names appearing in documents were not accused of crimes. Some were mentioned in passing, some appeared in flight logs. Some were listed in address books. Some were referenced in testimony without allegations. Public reaction often blurred the line between named in documents and charged with wrongdoing. In reality, only a limited number of individuals faced criminal charges. The documents did confirm something significant, though. Epstein had built one of the most extensive social networks of powerful figures in modern scandal history. Flight logs revealed trips taken by politicians, academics, celebrities, and business leaders. Many of those individuals later stated they had no knowledge of criminal conduct and had limited or no continued contact after learning of allegations. The so-called Black Book, which surfaced earlier in civil proceedings, contained hundreds of contacts, evidence of how deeply Epstein had embedded himself within elite society. Yet despite the scale of connections, prosecutors never produced public evidence of a large criminal conspiracy involving dozens of powerful figures. The narrative that Epstein maintained a global blackmail operation remains unproven in court. While law enforcement did recover digital media from his properties, no public criminal charges were filed against prominent public figures based on that material. Speculation grew louder after his death. Camera malfunctions, guard failures. The timing. Official investigations concluded that Epstein died by suicide. The Department of Justice Inspector General cited gross negligence and systemic failures at the jail, but found no evidence of homicide. For many, the official explanation felt unsatisfying. For victims, the outcome felt incomplete, because the trial that might have answered lingering questions never happened. After Epstein's death, his estate established a victim compensation program. Hundreds of claims were filed. Many survivors received financial settlements without having to endure lengthy court battles. Little St. James Island was eventually sold. His Manhattan townhouse was sold. The physical spaces that once symbolized secrecy became assets liquidated by the estate. But the broader impact of the case continues. The Epstein scandal forced public examination of how wealth intersects with justice, how influence shapes legal outcomes, how institutions respond when powerful individuals are accused of abuse. It exposed weaknesses in prosecutorial transparency. It revealed how vulnerable teenagers can be manipulated through money and status. And it demonstrated how long victims can be ignored before being heard. Today, years after his death, the term Epstein Files remains part of public conversation. For some, it represents documented court records and depositions. For others, it symbolizes unanswered questions. What is confirmed is this: Jeffrey Epstein ran a sex trafficking operation involving minors. He received a controversial plea deal in 2008. He was arrested again in 2019. He died before trial. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted for her role. Beyond that, much of what circulates online blends fact with speculation. The verified story is disturbing enough without embellishment. It is the story of a man who leveraged wealth and access to exploit vulnerable teenagers. It is the story of victims who spent years seeking justice. It is the story of institutions that failed to act decisively when first given the opportunity. And it is a reminder that power, unchecked, can shield wrongdoing for far longer than most imagine. But eventually, even the most insulated circles can fracture. And sometimes the truth surfaces not because of the powerful, but because survivors refuse to remain silent. After Ghislaine Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison in 2022, the criminal chapter of the Epstein case largely came to a close. Jeffrey Epstein himself never stood trial for the 2019 federal charges. His death in August 2019 meant the government's case against him was formally dismissed. In the American legal system, a defendant cannot be tried after death. The official ruling by the New York City medical examiner was suicide by hanging. The Department of Justice Inspector General later released a report detailing severe negligence inside the jail, including staffing shortages, missed security checks, and malfunctioning cameras. The report did not find evidence of homicide. 2 correctional officers who were on duty that night were charged with falsifying records. Those charges were later dismissed after they entered a deferred prosecution agreement. No additional criminal charges have been filed against other high-profile public figures in connection with Epstein's trafficking operation. Several civil lawsuits were filed in the years that followed. Some were settled, others were dismissed. Financial institutions that had handled Epstein's accounts reached major settlements in civil cases alleging they ignored warning signs. Those settlements did not include admissions of criminal wrongdoing but involved large financial payments. Epstein's estate created a compensation program for victims. Hundreds of claims were submitted, and many survivors received financial settlements. Properties once associated with him, including his Manhattan townhouse and his private island, were sold. Court documents were gradually unsealed over time. These documents included depositions, contact books, and flight logs. Many names appeared in those records. However, appearance in a document, address book, or flight log does not in itself establish criminal conduct. Most individuals named in documents have not been charged with crimes related to Epstein. Today, Ghislaine Maxwell remains in federal prison serving her sentence. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. There has been no public evidence presented that confirms a broader charged criminal conspiracy involving multiple powerful public figures. Many questions that people hoped would be answered at trial were never tested in court because the central defendant died before proceedings could unfold. For the victims, the outcome is mixed. There were convictions. There were financial settlements. There was public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But there was never a full trial of Jeffrey Epstein himself, and that is where the case stands. Not with a dramatic revelation, not with a sweeping courtroom climax, but with one conviction, multiple civil settlements, institutional criticism, and unanswered questions that may never be resolved in a court of law. That is the real ending, as it exists today,